You ever stand on your own land and watch 12 shiny new commercial buildings rise up on it without anyone asking your permission? I did. I watched every brick, every steel beam, every ribbon-cutting ceremony like a silent spectator at my own heist. The HOA thought they'd found a loophole, that the unused buffer zone at the edge of my ranch was theirs for the taking. They poured millions into it, called it the Ridge Marketplace, and bragged about boosting community value. I just smiled. Because what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I never lost the deed. They built their empire on my soil under my title, with my patience ticking like a clock. And when the grand opening came, I finally walked in and pulled out the paper that would turn their dream into my property. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And don't forget to subscribe because you're about to see how patience can buy back an empire. I grew up on this land long before there were HOA bylaws, fancy gates, or community enhancement committees. Back then, it was just the rolling edge of Mason County acres of red soil, wild cedar, and an old water line that ran from my grandfather's spring. The property sat right at the line where farmland met suburbia. As the city crept closer over the decades, developers started circling like vultures over a carcass, waiting for me to slip up, sell off, or die out. But I'm not the slip-up kind. My grandfather left me every deed survey and plat map tied with a leather strap. He wasn't much of a talker, but he always said, "Son, a man who knows his lines never loses his ground." He was right. I learned early to read more than just the land. I read the fine print. Every easement, every right-of-way, every clause that said who truly owned what. When I retired from my job as a civil infrastructure consultant, most folks thought I'd moved to the coast. Instead, I came back here to the same patch of red dirt that built my family's name. I restored the old barn, rebuilt the fence, and kept to myself. But my quiet life didn't sit well with one particular woman, the newly elected HOA president, Claire Whitmore. Claire was the type who smiled with her teeth, but never with her eyes. She had that polished suburban tone that could turn a simple greeting into a veiled command. She'd married into money, wore power suits to community picnics, and loved to remind everyone she represented the neighborhood. In her world, HOA rules were scripture, and she was both preacher and prophet. It started small, a letter about my unapproved fencing color, then another about my unmaintained ditch line. Mind you, that ditch line wasn't even part of their jurisdiction. It was the natural runoff channel from my spring, predating the HOA by 40 years. I sent polite replies, attached copies of my survey, and thought it would end there. But with people like Claire, ending there isn't in the vocabulary. One summer afternoon, I came home to find bright orange survey stakes hammered along my northern property line, but not my line. They were about 12 feet inside it. I followed them until they curved around a small meadow where the old mules used to graze. On one of the stakes, a plastic tag read, "Future site of the Ridge Marketplace, Community Project." I laughed out loud. Then I took a picture. A week later, the HOA newsletter announced a public-private partnership between the HOA board and Whitmore Development Group to construct a state-of-the-art retail plaza benefiting all residents. The render showed sleek glass storefronts, bike racks, and smiling families holding frozen yogurt. The description proudly mentioned repurposing underutilized buffer land adjacent to the HOA's northern lot. Adjacent, huh? Interesting choice of words. See, my land had a peculiar shape, a long L strip that wrapped around the northern border of the subdivision. When the HOA was formed 20 years ago, they thought they owned everything inside their boundary fence. But that fence wasn't the legal line, it was a drainage easement. And when the county plat maps were digitized, someone failed to record a small correction deed from 1972 that reestablished the old property boundaries. Meaning half the land they were about to build on, still mine. At first I figured they'd realize their mistake before doing anything stupid. But then came the bulldozers, the backhoes, the concrete mixers. Trucks rolled in with the HOA logo plastered beside Whitmore Development's emblem like it was a joint military operation. I drove down there one morning in my pickup parked near the site and walked right up to the foreman. "Morning," I said. He squinted. "Morning. You with the city?" "Nope," I said, smiling. "I'm with the land." He didn't get the joke. By the end of the week, they'd cleared half the trees and poured the first foundation. I started documenting everything, dates, photos, even the truck license plates. Every time they set a footing, I filed it under exhibit. Every time they poured concrete, I smiled wider. Because I knew the deeper they went, the more money they buried for me. Then came the HOA meeting. They invited all stakeholders to discuss the project's progress. So I showed up, clean shirt, quiet smile, and a small folder under my arm. Claire stood at the front of the room beside a projector displaying blueprints. Our community, she announced, is on the verge of a major transformation. The Ridge Marketplace will increase property values, reduce HOA dues, and finally give our residents a gathering place worthy of our neighborhood's prestige. Applause filled the room. When she asked for questions, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice dripping sugar. "Quick question," I replied. "Who owns the land you're building on?" A few chuckles rolled through the crowd. Claire smiled wider. "The HOA, of course. It's part of our northern buffer zone. The deeds were reviewed by our legal counsel." I nodded slowly. "You're sure about that?" "Positive," she said. "Everything's been verified." "Well then," I said, standing up, "I guess I'll let you keep building." And I walked out. The looks I got were priceless: confusion, amusement, even pity. They thought I'd given up, but all I'd done was light a fuse. That night, I went through my grandfather's old leather folder again, the yellowed paper crackling like it knew what was coming. I found the 1,972 deed correction and the notarized survey affidavit from the old county engineer. Those two documents alone could tear their entire project apart. But instead of marching to court the next morning, I made a different choice. I decided to wait. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about stopping your enemies, it's about letting them build something worth taking. They wanted a shopping plaza, fine. Let them pour every dollar into it. Let them lease every unit, hang every sign, and cut every ribbon. And when it was all standing tall and proud, I'd be there waiting with the one piece of paper they'd all forgotten about. By the end of spring, the HOA's construction site looked like a full-blown industrial zone. Trucks roared past the quiet cul-de-sac at 6 in the morning, dumping gravel and concrete where bluebonnets used to bloom. The sound of saws and jackhammers echoed through the valley like an anthem of arrogance. I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee and watched it all unfold. The chaos, the pride, the money burning by the hour. Claire was in her element. She strutted around the site in her pink safety vest, pointing at cranes like she owned the place. Her husband, a local realtor with too much hair gel and not enough humility, followed her around, filming every step for the HOA's Facebook page. Community Progress, the caption read. Proud to see the Ridge Marketplace come to life. They thought they were building a monument. I knew they were digging a trap. The first week, they laid rebar and poured footings for what would become the community square. I saw the trucks back up right over the old oak stump that marked my grandfather's boundary line. That stump wasn't much to look at anymore, gray, hollowed out by termites, but underneath it lay the corner pin of the original survey encased in concrete. The foreman had bulldozed right over a century of history without blinking. I didn't stop him. I just took pictures. I even had a little fun with it. Each morning I'd stroll by in my straw hat, nod at the workers, and say things like, "You boys sure making my property look good." They'd laugh, thinking I was joking. One guy even said, "You ought to thank the HOA when it's done. This'll boost your view." Oh, I'd thank them all right, eventually. By midsummer, the project was impossible to ignore. 12 commercial shells rose from the ground, a coffee shop, a yoga studio, a bank branch, 2 restaurants, even a small medical clinic. The HOA held progress tours every Saturday for residents. Claire walked them through the site like a proud developer, explaining how the project was self-funded through community dues and development bonds. Development bonds. That phrase made me grin, because I knew exactly where those bonds were registered and how cheap they'd get once the first round of payments defaulted under an invalid title. I started doing my homework quietly. Every night I sat in my office surrounded by county plat maps and scanned deeds. I compared GPS coordinates to old landmarks, the spring, the fence line, the oak stump. It all lined up perfectly. Nearly 3.8 acres of their community project were sitting squarely inside my property boundary. But I wasn't rushing. I visited the county recorder's office every week, pretending to be just another retired guy with too much time. I befriended an old clerk named Martha who had been working there since the 82nds. One afternoon, over stale coffee and lemon bars, she pulled out the microfilm records for the subdivision's creation. "See this," she said, pointing at the original plat. "They never filed the final correction deed. It was proposed but never recorded. So this line here," I pointed to the northern buffer, "still belongs to whoever held the parent parcel," she finished. "And from what I can see, that's you, Mr. Thompson." I smiled. "Good to have it confirmed, Martha." From that day on, I built a file thicker than a Bible. Photos, maps, drone shots, surveyor notes, letters from the HOA, everything. I knew that one day soon those documents would do more damage than any bulldozer. Meanwhile, Claire kept doubling down. She issued new HOA newsletters, declaring that the Ridge Marketplace will be the crown jewel of our neighborhood. She even sent me a fine notice, claiming my untrimmed weeds near the construction site were an eyesore to community progress. Imagine that they build on my land, then fine me for my grass. I framed that letter. Then came the community feedback meeting. It was supposed to be a celebration, a pat on the back session for Claire and her board. But I showed up anyway. The moment I walked in, Claire's smile stiffened like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Thompson," she said sweetly. "Here to support the project, I hope." Something like that, I said. The audience chuckled politely. She launched into a slideshow about future tenants' tax revenue and how the Ridge Marketplace will redefine suburban excellence. I waited until the end, then raised my hand again. "Claire," I said calmly, "mind clarifying which parcel numbers these buildings sit on?" She blinked. "Excuse me, parcel numbers," I repeated. "For the record, I'm curious which legal plots these structures are tied to." The room went quiet. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. "We're using the community's designated common zone," she said. I nodded slowly. "Good. I'll make sure the county knows which community to bill for the improvements." Someone in the back laughed nervously. Claire flushed red. "You're not funny, Mr. Thompson." "Oh, I'm not trying to be," I said. "I'm just patient." I left before she could reply. From that night on, I became invisible. I didn't attend another meeting, didn't reply to another letter, didn't say a word about boundaries. I let them finish what they started, and they did with enthusiasm. The HOA poured nearly $12 million into those buildings: landscaping, lighting, signage, and utilities. When they paved the parking lot, they had to tie into the county's stormwater system, which incidentally was built on an easement that ran directly through my deed. That meant every drop of runoff from their precious plaza technically drained into my property. I couldn't have designed it better myself. By late fall, the place looked stunning. Shiny glass storefronts reflected the sunset, string lights lined the walkways, and a banner across the entrance read, "Grand Opening the Ridge Marketplace," a vision brought to life by the HOA. Perfect, absolutely perfect. I remember standing by the fence the night before the ribbon cutting. The air was cool, the smell of fresh asphalt still sharp. The hum of new light fixtures filled the air like a promise of arrogance fulfilled. I thought of my grandfather's words again. "Never fight for what's already yours. Just wait until they realize it." I chuckled, softly turned off my flashlight, and walked back toward my truck. My patience was almost over. Because tomorrow, they'd hand me everything they'd built without even knowing it. You'd be surprised how much you can learn when you just let people talk. The HOA board, the contractors, the bankers, they all loved bragging about their landmark project. And while they patted themselves on the back, I was quietly connecting every loose wire in their so-called master plan. My first stop was the county recorder's office again. By this point, Martha at the front desk didn't even ask what I needed. She'd just smile, point me toward the old map room, and say, "The usual spot, Mr. Thompson." "The usual," I'd reply. What I needed wasn't flashy. It was buried literally in the dusty archive boxes, labeled Subdivision Expansions 1971-1980. Those were the years when my grandfather sold off some peripheral parcels to early developers. The deed restrictions he filed back then had one peculiar clause: no structure improvement or commercial operation shall be erected without written consent of the original grantor or his heirs. Guess who the heir was? I scanned the page, made 3 certified copies, and tucked one into my growing evidence folder. Then I called my old friend Bill Ramsey, a retired title officer who owed me a favor from a highway project we'd worked on a decade ago. Bill had a mind like a vault and a network that reached every corner of the county courthouse. "Bill," I said over the phone, "I need a quiet title trace, all the way from 1948 through 2023. Focus on parcel 16B through 16F. He chuckled. "That's a deep dig, Tom. What are you into?" "Let's just say the HOA built me a retirement gift," I said. "Ah, one of those stories. You got it." Within a week, he sent me the results. The trace was a mess of transfers, partial assignments, and overlapping liens, but buried in the fine print was gold. The Ridge HOA never held clean title. The buffer zone they thought they owned had never been legally transferred because the original boundary correction deed was missing. Every improvement, every structure, every utility line they'd installed rested on an invalid foundation. And better yet, one of the development loans they'd taken out used that same parcel as collateral. Meaning if I moved right, I could take control not just of the land, but the debt itself. That's when I brought in my accountant, Donna. Sharp as a tack, zero nonsense, and loyal ever since I helped her out of a zoning dispute years back. I showed her the folder and said I want to buy a few things anonymously. She raised an eyebrow. Anonymously. Through a trust. Something quiet. Something long-term. Over the next month, Donna helped me form the Red Ridge Community Trust, a legal entity with one beneficiary, me. Through that trust, we purchased the outstanding development bond notes that financed the HOA's project pennies on the dollar. The market thought they were junk paper. I thought they were the keys to a kingdom. Then I called in a favor from another old contact, Hank Lawson, a surveyor with 30 years of experience and the patience of a saint. He'd worked with me back when GPS mapping first came around. Hank, I said I need a new survey done, quiet and precise. You're mapping a piece of property that nobody realizes belongs to me yet. He laughed. You always did like playing chess, didn't you, Tom? Yep. And this one's checkmate in slow motion. For 3 weeks, Hank and his team worked under the radar. No big signs, no loud equipment. Just early mornings and late nights with tripods and drones. When he was done, the new survey confirmed what I'd known all along the entire north block of the Ridge Marketplace. 8 out of 12 buildings was on my property. Not a few inches over the line, not an overlap. Dead center. I had him notarize the report, sign an affidavit, and record it with the county the same day. Quietly. No notice to the HOA, not yet. Next, I began collecting evidence for what I called the patience folder. Emails from the HOA board, referencing HOA property lines. Video clips from Claire's press conferences. Promotional flyers claiming the land was HOA owned and funded. Drone footage showing their crews pouring foundations well within my boundary markers. Every piece fit like a puzzle. Now, here's where it got fun. I didn't want to stop them. Stopping them early would have been like fishing before the bait hit the water. I needed them to reach substantial completion, the legal term meaning 90–95% done before I struck. Because once a project is substantially complete, every improvement legally affixed to land becomes part of the real property. And in property law, improvements follow the landowner. Translation: the minute they finished building, every brick belonged to me. By early winter, the HOA was hosting preview tours for potential tenants. I even tagged along once, pretending to be a prospective investor. Claire recognized me immediately, her lips tightened like she'd bitten through lemon rind. "Mr. Thompson," she said curtly, "what brings you here?" I smiled. "Just admiring progress." "Progress takes cooperation," she replied coldly. "Oh, I agree," I said, glancing at the buildings. "And accountability." She didn't get it. Yet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing everything. I had the survey, the deeds, the restrictive covenant, the recorded chain of title, and even the financial instruments tied to the project. Legally speaking, I owned the dirt, the air above it, and the debt under it. But I wasn't going to gloat. Not yet. Instead, I prepared the Notice of Reservation of Rights, a simple one-page document stating that I retained all ownership interests in the property and that any encroachments, improvements, or modifications were made without my consent. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't even a threat. It was just a polite signed warning, the legal equivalent of saying, "I see you." The next morning, I delivered a copy to the HOA office myself. The clerk, a nervous college intern, looked at it like I'd handed him a live grenade. "Should I give this to Mrs. Whitmore?" he stammered. "Oh, yes," I said, grinning, "and tell her to read the fine print." 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Claire. Her tone was ice cold. "What exactly is this?" "Just documentation," I said calmly. "Don't worry, you can keep building. You're threatening the HOA." "No," I replied. "I'm protecting my property. There's a difference." She hung up without another word. From that moment, I could feel the tension in the air every time I drove past the site. Workers whispered when I parked nearby. The HOA's lawyer started leaving voicemails filled with polite threats about potential civil interference. I didn't answer. Because I knew what they didn't, that the deed sitting in my safe had more power than every excavator lawyer and committee vote combined. And soon, when they were done polishing the last window and hanging the grand opening banner, I'd show them what real ownership looked like. By the time January rolled around, the Ridge Marketplace was practically gleaming. They had crews working overtime to hit the grand opening deadline. Fresh, asphalt-polished, glass LED signs. It looked like something straight out of a suburban dream brochure. The HOA newsletter called it a triumph of modern community leadership. Claire called it her legacy. I called it collateral. I hadn't said a word since sending that reservation of rights letter. Silence was my best weapon. It let them grow confident, arrogant even. I knew the board was meeting weekly, now whispering my name in their minutes, probably calling me a nuisance. I didn't care. Let them underestimate me, it made the fall that much sweeter. One bright morning I drove by just as Claire and her team were hosting a media tour. She stood near the fountain in the plaza center, posing for pictures with the mayor talking about economic renewal. Her husband was filming again, panning across the storefronts while she beamed proudly in her pastel suit. From my truck I could hear her voice echo through the mic. This project proves what can happen when a community unites under strong leadership, I chuckled. Strong leadership, huh? More like strong delusion. When she spotted my truck across the street, her face flickered just for a second. Then she smiled tightly and waved like a queen, acknowledging a peasant. I tipped my hat in return. 2 days later, I received a certified envelope from the HOA's law firm. Inside was a cease and desist order, claiming I was creating confusion regarding property ownership and interfering with community development. It even threatened to fine me for defamatory statements, though I hadn't made a single one publicly. I framed that letter too, right next to the first fine about my untrimmed weeds. My wall was starting to look like a museum of arrogance. But their desperation told me something important. They were nervous. My quiet confidence was spooking them more than any lawsuit could, and they were right to be nervous because I wasn't bluffing. The next week, I invited a few old friends for coffee: Bill, the title officer, Hank, the surveyor, and Donna, my accountant. We sat at my kitchen table surrounded by binders, maps, and certified documents. Gentlemen, lady, I began. Our dear HOA has officially finished building. Bill whistled. You're ready to drop the hammer, almost, but not with force, with precision. Donna grinned. You're really going to let them walk into it, huh? Not walk, I said. March. We spent the morning reviewing the paperwork, the recorded survey, the trust ownership, the liens, the bonds, the original restrictive covenant, and the reservation of rights. Every I dotted, every T crossed. By law, they had built 12 multi-million-dollar structures on land that didn't belong to them, and worse, they'd used it as collateral for financing. That meant every building, every lease, every dollar they generated was mine to claim. But still I waited. I wanted them to finish the last flourish, the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The cameras, the champagne, the self-congratulation. Because when you expose pride, it needs an audience. The big day came on a Saturday morning in February. The whole neighborhood turned up. Balloons, food trucks, banners, it looked like a carnival. The mayor gave a short speech about community growth. The local news van parked nearby, broadcasting the event live. Claire took the stage in a pale pink suit, her blonde hair, perfectly sculpted microphone in hand. Today, she said dramatically, we celebrate not just a marketplace, but a movement. The Ridge Marketplace is the beating heart of our future. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Children clapped. And I, standing quietly near the back with a folder under my arm, just smiled. When the speeches ended and the ribbon was cut, I waited for the crowd to start dispersing. Then I walked up the center aisle, boots clicking against their shiny new pavement. A few people turned confused as I made my way toward Claire. She spotted me and tensed immediately. Mr. Thompson, she said through gritted teeth. Now's not a good time. Oh, I think it's perfect, I replied. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my folder and handed it to her. This is a notice of ownership and encroachment, I said calmly. Every building on this plaza sits on my property. You've improved my land without consent. I'll be recording an amended deed and ground lease first thing Monday morning. She blinked, her fake smile faltering. You can't be serious. As a heart attack, I said. And just for the record, I own the development bonds too. So technically you financed my new investment with your HOA dues. Thank you for that. Her lawyer, a skinny man with an overgrown ego, stepped forward. This is absurd, he snapped. You can't. I cut him off. Everything I'm saying is documented and recorded. I've been patient, but I'm done watching you build castles on my dirt. From this moment, I'm the landlord, the crowd murmured. A few reporters leaned closer. Cameras clicked. The mayor stepped back awkwardly. Claire's face drained of color. You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I dare, I said, grinning. In fact, I already did. I handed her a second envelope, certified copies of the recorded survey, restrictive covenant, and the trust ownership. She opened it with trembling hands. The header read, Red Ridge Community Trust. Registered owner Thomas Thompson. The silence that followed was glorious. You could almost hear her pride cracking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just looked around at the reporters and said, funny thing about property law, build on someone else's land and it's theirs. You can look it up. Then I tipped my hat, turned around, and walked back toward my truck as the cameras swarmed her. Within an hour, the HOA emergency board meeting was in full meltdown. My phone blew up with calls from Claire, her lawyer, even a couple of nervous residents. I ignored them all. I spent that evening by the fire, sipping bourbon, watching the local news replay my little confrontation under the headline, HOA's $12 million project may sit on private land. Couldn't have written a better tagline myself. By Sunday night, the HOA's attorney emailed me a proposal to resolve this misunderstanding. I didn't even open it. I was already drafting my own offer, a lease agreement, so airtight they'd have no choice but to sign it. See, revenge isn't about shouting, it's about silence and timing. They thought they'd buried me under concrete, but all they really did was build me an empire. That Monday morning felt like Judgment Day wrapped in sunshine. The town still buzzed with gossip about the HOA property scandal from the grand opening, and Claire's face had already made the front page of the Mason County Chronicle with a headline that read, "Marketplace built on disputed land." I woke up early, ironed a clean shirt, and brewed myself a pot of coffee. I didn't need to rush. Justice moves slow, but steady like a freight train on greased rails. By 10 a.m., I was parked right outside the county recorder's office with my briefcase in hand. Inside were all the documents that would seal the deal, the verified survey, the restrictive covenant, the old plat map, and most importantly, the original deed signed by my grandfather in 1972. Martha, my favorite clerk, looked up from her desk when I walked in. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," she said with a grin. "You here to finish it. Today's the day," I said, sliding the folder across the counter. "Let's make it official." She stamped the documents, notarized the trust assignment, and entered it into the public record. I stood there listening to the click of her keyboard, feeling the weight of decades shift into place. When she handed me the receipt of record, I looked at that timestamp like it was a coronation. "Congratulations," she said. "You just became the landlord of a shopping center." "Wouldn't be the first time patients paid rent," I replied, tipping my hat. From there, I drove straight to the county sheriff's civil unit. Sheriff Hughes, a man I'd known since high school, greeted me with a handshake and a raised eyebrow. "Heard your name on the news, Tom," he said. "You really pulled the rug out from under that HOA, didn't you?" "I didn't pull the rug," I said. "They laid it on my floor." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Then I handed him a copy of the recorded deed and a notarized notice of possession. "What's this for?" he asked. "I need a civil presence while I post official notices at the site, just to keep things calm." He nodded. "You expecting trouble with Claire always?" By noon, I was back at the Ridge Marketplace this time, not as a spectator. 2 deputy trucks pulled in behind me, lights flashing, though no sirens. Shoppers slowed down to stare as we parked right in front of the shiny new plaza. Claire was already there, storming toward me like a hurricane in heels. "You can't just show up here with the police," she snapped. "Relax," I said. "They're just witnesses." I turned to the nearest pillar by the plaza fountain and began taping a laminated document, Notice of Ownership and Lease Negotiation, Red Ridge Community Trust. Claire snatched at the paper. "You're trespassing." "No," I said, smiling. "You are." The sheriff's deputy stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, he's within his rights. County records were updated this morning. This property is listed under the Red Ridge Community Trust, managed by Mr. Thomas Thompson." Her jaw dropped. "That's impossible." "Feel free to verify," the deputy said. "But we just got the update from the recorder's office ourselves. You could have heard a pin drop." Her lawyer, that same smug guy from the ribbon cutting, started whispering furiously into his phone, pacing like a trapped rat. I stayed calm, almost serene, while the deputies placed official notice tags on each of the plaza's main doors. It looked like a silent ceremony of poetic justice. Shoppers peeked out from coffee shops. One of the restaurant owners came out confused. "Excuse me," he said. "What's going on? Do we need to close?" I smiled kindly. "Not at all. You're safe. Your lease will just have a new landlord." He blinked. "Wait, you mean?" "That's right," I said. "Welcome to the Red Ridge Marketplace. I'll be in touch." Claire's voice rose a pitch higher. "You think you can steal our community property, Claire," I said evenly. "You built your dream on someone else's dirt. I tried to warn you. You ignored me. Now, by law, everything built here belongs to me. You can either negotiate or litigate, but either way you'll be paying rent." Her face turned crimson. "You're bluffing. Check the county records," I said. "I'll wait." Her lawyer muttered something, checked his phone, and suddenly froze. The color drained from his face. "Claire, he's right. The record's updated. He owns it." The sound that came from her next wasn't human. It was somewhere between a shriek and a gasp. The deputies, to their credit, stayed professional. They just nodded politely and began filing their reports. As I walked the plaza, I took a long look at the polished storefronts and bright signage. My footsteps echoed across the new tiles they'd so proudly installed. Each sound was a heartbeat of victory. I remembered every letter, every fine, every smug smirk from Claire when she told me the HOA knows best. And now she stood powerless, watching the foundation of her empire crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. When the deputies finished, I thanked them and turned back to Claire. "I'm offering a peaceful solution," I said. "I'll lease the land back to the HOA at a fair market rate. You can keep managing the buildings if you like, or walk away. Either way, this marketplace now operates under my ownership," she sneered. "You think you've won, but the HOA will fight you tooth and nail." "Then bring your nails," I said with a smirk. "I've got the deed." The deputies chuckled softly as we walked back to our trucks. Claire's shouts faded behind us, drowned by the chatter of shocked onlookers and the hum of camera phones capturing the scene. That night, local news ran the footage again. Aerial shots from drones showed the plaza, with my posted notices fluttering in the wind, the sheriff's trucks parked beside them. The anchor's voice said, "Today, a stunning twist in the Ridge Marketplace story property ownership has officially changed hands following a recorded deed correction from 1972. I sat by the fire again, bourbon in hand, watching the flames dance across the glass. It wasn't just revenge, it was restoration. My grandfather's land, my legacy reclaimed in broad daylight. But it wasn't over yet. I still had one more move left: the courtroom. Because while Claire was busy throwing tantrums, I was preparing to make the victory permanent by turning their pride into a legal precedent. And when that was done, I'd make sure the Ridge Marketplace didn't just belong to me. It would serve the whole county on my terms, under my name, and with every lesson carved into its foundation. Because you don't need to shout to win a war. Sometimes you just have to own the ground everyone else is standing on. When you own the dirt, you own the story. But to make it permanent, you've got to write the ending in ink, not just in pride. That's why, 2 weeks after the sheriff visit, I found myself walking into the Mason County Courthouse deed folder under my arm, cool as morning steel. The HOA had filed for an emergency injunction claiming I was unlawfully seizing community property. Their lawyer, that slick one with the perfect hair and zero humility, strutted through the lobby like he'd already won. Claire, in her tailored lilac suit, followed close behind, chin high, eyes sharp. She looked confident again, probably because her attorney had convinced her that no judge would ever let a single man take an entire marketplace. They really had no idea who they were dealing with. When the bailiff called the case, I took my seat opposite them, calm as a man sitting on a mountain. The judge, an old colleague of my father's named Judge Faraday, peered over his glasses and said, "All right, folks, let's see what sort of neighborly chaos we're dealing with today." The HOA's lawyer launched first. "Your Honor," he began dramatically, "this man is attempting to extort an entire community by exploiting outdated property records and technical loopholes. The Ridge Marketplace is a community asset built for the public good, and Mr. Thompson is trying to claim it for personal gain." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Mr. Thompson, what do you have to say for yourself?" I stood, placed a thick binder on the table, and said, "Just facts, Your Honor." And then I laid it all out, step by step. First, the original deed from 1972, recorded and notarized. Then the restrictive covenant granting my family final authority over any commercial use of the land. Then the survey freshly certified, showing the marketplace sitting squarely inside my boundary lines. Then the chain of title proving that no legal transfer had ever occurred to the HOA. And finally, the development bonds, the same ones I had quietly purchased, showing I now held financial control of their entire project. The judge flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising higher with each page. The courtroom grew quieter than a church. Claire's lawyer tried to interject. "Your Honor, these documents are irrelevant." Faraday raised a hand. "Counselor, if you interrupt one more time, you'll be irrelevant." I almost smiled. Then I added one last piece, a series of video clips from HOA meetings and Claire's press conferences, where she publicly claimed ownership of HOA land and promised full community transparency. Each video ended with her saying the words, "This project sits proudly on HOA property." When the last clip ended, I leaned forward and said, "Your Honor, not only did they build on my land without permission, they used that land as collateral for development loans. Under state law, any improvements affixed to private property without consent become part of that property, meaning every building they financed, every brick they laid, legally belongs to me." The lawyer sputtered. "That's absurd. He can't just." Faraday raised a hand again. "Can and did, apparently." The courtroom chuckled. Claire was pale now, staring down at the table. Her perfect manicure tapped nervously against the wood. I didn't hate her, not really. I just hated what she represented, the arrogance of people who think authority equals ownership. The judge sighed, flipping the final page of my binder. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Mr. Thompson, this documentation is airtight. It appears you are the rightful owner of the land under the Ridge Marketplace. Furthermore, the HOA failed to conduct proper title verification prior to development. That's negligence, at best fraud, at worst. The lawyer stammered something about community benefit and public trust, but Faraday wasn't having it. You can't build on someone's property without consent and then call it a gift, he said sharply. That's not how property law works. I'm denying your injunction. Mr. Thompson, what remedy are you seeking? I paused, pretending to think, though I'd rehearsed this line for months. Your Honor, I'm not asking for demolition or damages. I simply request a declaratory judgment affirming my ownership and the establishment of a commercial ground lease between my trust and the HOA for continued use of the land. A fair rate, of course. The lawyer scoffed. You're making them pay rent for their own project, I smiled. They can call it what they want. I call it accountability. Faraday leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. I like that word. Accountability. He scribbled a few notes, then looked at Claire. Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly suggest you accept Mr. Thompson's offer. Otherwise, you'll be looking at an eviction order for 12 commercial tenants and a very public lawsuit you will not win. The silence that followed could have frozen air. Claire swallowed hard, her pride cracking like glass. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Finally, she spoke through clenched teeth. Your Honor, the HOA is willing to negotiate a lease. I nodded politely. Good choice. The judge banged the gavel once. Case resolved in favor of Mr. Thompson. Court adjourned. I gathered my papers and walked out to the courthouse steps, the February air crisp against my face. A reporter shoved a microphone toward me. Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to win against the HOA? I smiled. I didn't win against anyone. I just reminded them who owned the ground they were standing on. By the end of that week, we signed the lease agreement. The HOA would pay my trust an annual rent indexed to the plaza's gross revenue, effectively making me a silent partner in every single business there. I didn't take their land. I just made them pay for the privilege of staying on it. Claire resigned 2 days later. The HOA board fractured like dry clay. Half the members quit, the rest turned on each other. Word spread fast. The woman who built the future had accidentally built it for someone else. A month later, I drove by the Ridge Marketplace again. The lights still shone, the shop still opened, the fountain still sparkled. But this time, every storefront check, every parking lot fee, every rent payment flowed back into the Red Ridge Community Trust. Back to me. And standing there looking at that bustling plaza, I realized something deeper than revenge. Sometimes justice isn't loud or flashy. It doesn't come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it's just quiet ownership. The calm satisfaction of knowing the truth always outlasts the lie. I tipped my hat to the wind and walked away, leaving Claire's ghost behind me in the reflection of all that glass she thought she owned. The funny thing about winning is that it doesn't always come with cheering. Sometimes victory sounds like the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above your own desk, the kind you once thought you'd never need again. That was my sound the morning after the court ruling. The phone kept ringing with congratulations from neighbors, lawyers, and even a few business owners at the plaza who realized their rent checks now had my name on them. The Ridge Marketplace was running smoothly under new terms, though you could feel the chill around its glass corridors. People still shopped, but the energy had shifted. The HOA banners were gone. The gold plaque that once read, "Built by the Ridge HOA," now simply said, "The Red Ridge Marketplace, managed by Community Trust." Claire's name was nowhere to be found. She tried to fight the lease for a few weeks after resigning, hiring yet another lawyer who promised a jurisdictional miracle. But the county records didn't lie. Every title, every plat, every easement had been verified twice over. My name, or rather my trust's, sat permanently in black ink beside the words "fee simple owner." Eventually, she moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Rumor had it, her husband's real estate firm collapsed under the PR storm. Some folks felt sorry for her. Others said she got what she deserved. I didn't hate her. I never did. I just knew people like her always confuse power for ownership, as if controlling a few rules makes them kings and queens of the land beneath their feet. The new HOA board was different, humbled. They called me to extend goodwill and even offered to collaborate on a park project next to the plaza. I accepted under one condition, that every future community project must undergo full title verification through the county, witnessed by at least 2 property owners and a notary. No more assumptions, no more arrogance. When we met to sign the memorandum, the new president, a younger woman named Erica, said softly, Mr. Thompson, I hope there are no hard feelings. I smiled. None at all. Just lessons learned. She laughed nervously. You really let them finish everything before stepping in. Of course, I said, leaning back. Why stop someone who's busy making you money? She blinked, then chuckled. That's terrifyingly smart. Not smart, I corrected. Patient. Patience. That's all this story had ever been about. Weeks turned into months, and the marketplace thrived. The rent from the plaza not only paid property taxes, but funded scholarships for the local high school through the trust. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same ground that had once been a symbol of HOA greed had turned into a source of community good. One spring evening, I stood by the fountain they'd built, watching kids play near the lights. The setting sun hit the water just right, scattering reflections across the storefront windows. For a moment, it almost looked like the place had always belonged here, like maybe it was meant to exist, just not under the wrong hands. A man in a cafe apron waved at me. Hey, Mr. Thompson, you're the owner, right? Just wanted to say thanks for keeping the rent fair. I nodded. Glad business is good. Best month yet, he said proudly. Guess Karma works in commercial real estate too. Karma. Yeah, I'd say so. That night I went home and pulled out my grandfather's old leather folder, the same one that had started this whole journey. The paper was yellowed now, fragile but eternal. His handwriting on the corner of the original survey still read, "Hold the line." I traced the words with my finger and smiled. He wasn't talking about fences or property lines. He meant integrity, knowing where you stand, and never letting someone move you off, it not with charm, not with threats, not with lies dressed as progress. I poured myself a bourbon, stepped onto the porch, and listened to the faint sounds of traffic rolling by from the new plaza. Every car that passed was a reminder they had paved over my patience, not my peace. A few months later, the county invited me to speak at a local development seminar, something about property rights and community conflicts. I don't usually do public talks, but I figured why not? The auditorium was packed with developers, landowners, and a few smug-looking HOA presidents. When it was my turn, I walked up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and said, "Good afternoon. My name's Thomas Thompson. I'm here to tell you that if you build on someone else's land without knowing who really owns it, well, you might just end up paying rent to the guy you ignored." The audience laughed, then quieted. I told them the story not out of pride, but as a warning. I explained how one misplaced deed line could destroy millions in investment and how arrogance cost more than any contractor ever could. By the time I finished, even the proudest developers were scribbling notes. Afterward, a young man approached me. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "how did you stay calm through all that? I would have sued them the moment they broke ground." I smiled. "Son, when someone starts digging their own hole, don't take the shovel away." He laughed, shaking his head. "That's cold." "No," I said, sipping from my coffee cup. "That's justice served at room temperature." The day ended quietly, just the way I liked it. I drove home passing the plaza one more time. The lights shimmered, the parking lot was full, and a big sign out front read, "Welcome to Red Ridge, community built to last." I rolled down my window, let the wind carry the hum of the place into my truck, and thought, yeah, built to last because it's built on truth now. Somewhere I could almost hear my grandfather chuckle. Because the best kind of revenge isn't destroying what someone built, it's owning it, improving it, and turning it into something better. And maybe that's the real secret when you fight for what's yours the right way. You don't just win land, you win peace. In the end, this wasn't about deeds, documents, or dollars, it was about respect. Respect for what's earned, not taken. For what's true, not assumed. I learned that patience is the sharpest weapon a man can wield. You don't have to shout to win. You just have to stand firm and let arrogance collapse under its own weight. If you ever find yourself fighting against injustice, whether it's a greedy HOA, a pushy neighbor, or anyone who mistakes silence for weakness, remember this silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. So tell me in the comments, have you ever had to hold the line in your own life? And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button because trust me, the next HOA tale is even wilder.